Welcome to Strangely Local, a Hastings Community TV original series. No sport better represents summertime like baseball. Naturally, we of the city are always rooting for Hastings Blue Jays to come out victorious. But for one game back in July, the forces of the supernatural were rooting for the other team. Tonight, we hear from Ian Andrusak, a fellow employee of Hastings Community Television, and their experience covering what was truly a strange broadcast of the Hastings Blue Jays game. Let's take a listen.
It was the Hastings Blue Jays playing against the Egan Chipmunks that night. The game started at 8. The crew call was at 5, so we had a good 3 hours before the show to get everything up and ready to cover the game. We were lucky to have that 3-hour window because the tech was frustrating to get going, and to make matters worse, we had terrible reception on our phones. We couldn't call or text if we were further away. I think it had something to do with that huge solar flare from the sun the night before. I don't know.
When were you able to get things working properly?
About an hour before the game started. The signal from our phones was getting better, but we didn't need them as much because we finally got the headsets working fine. Everything was looking good for the night. The first couple of innings saw zeros for both teams, but it was during the third where things got interesting.
Oh?
I was operating one of the 4 cameras being used to film the event. I was positioned on the right side of the field, getting a medium shot of the batter and catcher. When the Chipmunks were at the bat, I caught the batter smacking the ball into the air and making a run to first base. I followed them as they ran like the wind, but then the director asked me what I was doing and told me to pan the camera back to position. I was confused as to why, but then I looked up from my camera's viewfinder and saw the same batter in their original position on home plate. For the rest of that half of the inning, I followed the action as I positioned my head above the viewfinder and followed the game as it actually played from there. Once in a while, I checked my viewfinder and it was just like opposite day. The Blue Jays were losing to the Chipmunks on that screen, but in real life, it was a totally different story. I wondered if something was wrong with me. Thoughts kept racing through my head. Was I sick? But then I found out that I wasn't the only one. Max was starting to see the same game on their camera's viewfinder, and then as the game carried throughout the night, soon all 4 cameras were seeing the same thing.
What did you do?
Our director requested that during the break, that we shut off our cameras and just get them rebooted.
And did it work?
Actually, yes, it did. Things carried on as they normally would, but then in the last inning, when Hastings was for sure gonna win it, the director's monitors started glitching, and when the feed came back, they were seeing the finale of the game that we were seeing in our viewfinders. Then we were all getting the same thing.
So, what did you do?
We followed the game as best we could. We just had to follow the action with our eyes.
Being natural with the supernatural.
When the game was over, we tore down and packed up for the night. To everyone's surprise, the feed that viewers saw was the actual game, but not so surprisingly, there were a few complaints about the jerky camera movement from all the mishaps.
Interesting. Any repeats of this unusual activity since then?
No, not yet, thankfully. By the way, you sound awfully familiar. You wouldn't happen to be from a different universe, would you? I've also had to deal with that before.
What? No, there's no way. Anyways, thank you, Ian, for sharing with us, and take care.
You're welcome, and thanks. By the way, do you know who's been taking all those little coffee packets from the station?
Why did you include that? Well, that was one game that the crew will not soon forget anytime soon. Thank you for joining us this week for another installment of Strangely Local. And just to set the record straight, I am not at all related to that guy who was on the phone. This is just, everybody keeps saying that. Anyways, we'll be back next week. Till then, Hastings, keep things strange.